The goblet shattered against the stone floor, before Elena Hartley even understood she had dropped it. "Pick it up," Damien Ashford said, his voice low and cold enough to silence the entire hall. "Or is even that too difficult for you?" Elena's hands trembled as she knelt among the shards of glass, the sharp edges biting into her palms as she gathered them. Around her, the great hall of Blackthorn Pack had gone completely still. Hundreds of wolves, shifted into their human forms for the feast, watched in silence. Some smirked. Others looked away, too uncomfortable to meet her eyes. Nobody moved to help her. Damien stood above her, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark eyes glinting with a mixture of irritation and contempt. He was the Alpha King of the Blackthorn territory, the strongest wolf born in 3 generations, and everyone in the hall knew it. His word was law, his anger was something to fear, and right now, his anger was aimed squarely at her. "I am so sorry, Alpha," Elena whispered, not daring to look up. "It slipped from my hand." "Everything slips from your hands," Damien said. "That is because you have no strength in them, no strength anywhere in you, if I am honest." He turned to address the room, his voice carrying easily across the silence. "This is what happens when weak blood is allowed to remain in a strong pack. It becomes clumsy. It becomes useless." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the crowd. Not everyone laughed. Some of the older wolves frowned, uneasy with the cruelty in his words, but enough laughed that the sound filled the hall like a wave crashing over her. Elena felt her face burn. She was used to being overlooked. She was used to being forgotten in the kitchens where she worked, used to being the last one greeted and the first one dismissed. But being humiliated like this, in front of everyone, was different. This was a wound that would not fade quickly. "Get up," Damien said, his tone flat now, as if he had already grown bored of her. "And bring another pitcher. Try not to break that one too." Elena rose to her feet, still clutching broken glass in her hands, and hurried from the hall. She did not look back. She did not want to see whether he was still watching her, still enjoying the show he had made of her pain. She made it as far as the kitchen corridor, before her legs gave out, and she pressed her back against the cold stone wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor. Her hands were shaking. Blood, thin and dark, welled from a small cut on her palm, where a piece of glass had sliced her skin. She stared at it, strangely fascinated by how ordinary the wound looked. Red blood, human blood, wolf blood. It looked the same as everyone else's, and yet nobody in that hall would ever believe that she was capable of anything more than clumsiness and apology. Elena had been born in Omega, the lowest rank in the pack hierarchy, and for 22 years she had lived exactly the life that rank demanded. She served. She stayed quiet. She did not question the alphas, the betas, or anyone ranked above her, which in Blackthorn Pack meant almost everyone. Her wolf, when she shifted, was smaller than most, with dull gray fur, and none of the impressive size or speed that marked the pack's stronger members. She had grown used to hearing whispers about her weakness for as long as she could remember. She had grown used to swallowing her tears until she was alone. But tonight, something about Damien's words lodged differently in her chest, not just hurt, something sharper, something that felt almost like anger, except she had never truly allowed herself to feel anger before. Omegas who showed anger were reminded quickly of their place. She sat there for a long moment, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and music drifting from the hall, and told herself, as she always did, that this was simply her life. She would gather herself, fetch the pitcher, and return to her duties. Tomorrow the feast would be over, and life would continue as it always had. She did not know, as she pressed her bleeding palm against the stone floor to push herself up, that something ancient and long asleep inside her had just stirred for the very first time. The kitchens of Blackthorn Pack were built into the lower level of the stone keep, a maze of ovens, long wooden tables, and hanging pots that never seemed to cool down even in the depths of winter. Elena had worked there since she was 12 years old, first as a helper to the older cooks, and now, at 22, as one of the few Omegas trusted to prepare food for the Alpha's own table. It was not an honor, exactly. It was simply where she had ended up, the same way water finds the lowest point in any landscape. She wrapped a strip of cloth around her cut palm, and returned to the hall with a fresh pitcher, careful this time to keep both hands firmly around its base. Damien did not look at her again as she poured the wine. He had already moved on to a conversation with his beta, Nathaniel Cole. a broad-shouldered man, with a calm, watchful face, who had served as Damien's second since childhood. Elena caught only fragments of their conversation as she worked. Something about a border dispute with the Ravenswood pack, and something about an arrangement with a neighboring territory that Nathaniel seemed uneasy about. The council will not accept anything less than a formal alliance, Nathaniel was saying quietly. Marriage would settle the matter faster than any treaty. Damien's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, which Elena found strange. The Damien she knew always had something sharp to say. His silence on this particular subject felt heavier than his usual cruelty. She finished pouring and stepped back from the table, eager to disappear into the background where she belonged. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught, for just a moment, the gaze of an older woman sitting near the far end of the hall. The woman was not dressed like the other guests. Her clothing was plain and worn, clearly not made for a feast, and her silver hair was pulled back in a simple braid. Elena did not recognize her, and yet something about the woman's steady, knowing stare made her pause. The woman raised 2 fingers to her lips, a small and strange gesture, as if signaling Elena to remain quiet about something neither of them had spoken aloud. Then she rose from her seat and slipped out of the hall through a side door before Elena could react. Elena told herself it meant nothing. Strangers passed through Blackthorn territory all the time, traders and travelers seeking shelter or trade with the pack. She had more important things to worry about than a stranger's odd behavior, and she pushed the memory aside as she returned to the kitchen to finish the night's work. It was well past midnight by the time Elena finally left the keep and made her way toward the small cottage she shared with 2 other Omega women near the eastern edge of the packlands. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, and for the first time all evening, Elena allowed herself to breathe freely. She did not take the main road, she rarely did. Instead, she followed a narrow path through the trees, a route she had walked 1,000 times before, worn smooth by her own feet over years of late nights and early mornings. The forest at night did not frighten her the way it frightened some of the other Omegas. If anything, she found a strange comfort in the darkness, in the quiet rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl somewhere above. She had almost reached the edge of the trees when she felt it. A pull. Deep in her chest, beneath her ribs, in a place she had never felt anything before. It was not pain, not exactly, though it made her stumble and press a hand against a nearby tree trunk to steady herself. It felt like something enormous, shifting inside a space far too small to contain it, like a door creaking open somewhere deep within her that had been sealed shut her entire life. Elena gasped and stood very still, waiting for the sensation to pass. Around her, the forest had gone unnaturally quiet. No owl calls, no rustling leaves. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the feeling faded, leaving her breathless and confused in the darkness. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart pound beneath her palm, and told herself it was nothing. Exhaustion, stress from the humiliation at the feast, nothing more. She did not notice the faint shimmer of silver light that had, for just an instant, traced along the edges of her skin, before disappearing into the night. The cottage was dark and quiet when Elena finally arrived, her roommates already asleep. She slipped into her narrow bed without lighting a candle, too tired and too unsettled to do anything but close her eyes and hope that sleep would come quickly. It did, but it did not bring rest. In her dream, Elena stood in a place she did not recognize, a wide, silver-lit clearing, surrounded by trees taller than any she had ever seen, their bark pale as bone, and their leaves glowing faintly, as though lit from within by moonlight that had nowhere else to go. In the center of the clearing stood a wolf. It was unlike any wolf she had ever seen in Blackthorn territory. Its fur was a shimmering, almost liquid silver white, and its eyes burned a deep molten gold, steady and ancient, as though they had witnessed centuries pass. The wolf did not growl or advance toward her. It simply watched her, its gaze patient and knowing, the way an old teacher might watch a student who was almost, but not quite, ready to understand a difficult lesson. "Who are you?" Elena asked, her voice small in the vast, silver-lit space. The wolf did not answer in words. Instead, Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest, gentle and steady, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long winter. It was a feeling she had never experienced before. Not from her pack, not from anyone in her entire life. It felt, strangely, like recognition, like being seen, truly seen, for the first time. Then the wolf turned and walked toward the tree line, pausing once to glance back at her, over its shoulder, as if inviting her to follow. Elena took a single step forward, and woke with a gasp, her heart pounding, sunlight already creeping through the thin curtains of her small window. She lay still for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to hold on to the feeling from the dream, before it slipped away entirely, the way dreams always did. But this one lingered. This one felt different, heavier, as if it had left a mark somewhere deep inside her that she could not quite name. She rose slowly, dressed for the day, and told herself, as she always did, that dreams were only dreams. But as she walked to the kitchen for her morning shift, she found herself glancing at her own reflection, in the still surface of a water basin, half expecting to see molten gold eyes, staring back at her, instead of her own plain brown ones. They were, of course, exactly as they had always been, ordinary, unremarkable, weak, if Damien Ashford was to be believed. And yet, for the first time in her life, Elena did not entirely believe that anymore. The morning brought fresh humiliation, though of a smaller and more familiar kind. Elena was assigned, as she often was, to serve the morning meal for the pack's inner circle: Damien, Nathaniel, and several of the senior betas who advised the Alpha King on matters of territory and trade. It was tedious work, requiring long hours of standing quietly against the wall, ready to refill cups or clear plates at a moment's notice, all while remaining as invisible as possible. Damien barely acknowledged her presence, which suited Elena fine after the previous night's events. She kept her eyes down, her movements careful and precise, determined not to give him any further reason to single her out. It was Nathaniel who spoke to her first, surprising her. "You're the one who serves the Alpha's table most nights, aren't you?" he asked, his tone mild and curious rather than commanding. "Yes, sir," Elena answered, keeping her eyes lowered. "You handled last night well," Nathaniel said. "Better than I would have, in your position." Elena glanced up, startled by the unexpected kindness in his voice. Nathaniel was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Not pity exactly, but something close to genuine curiosity. Before she could respond, Damien's voice cut across the table. "Nathaniel, we were discussing the Ravenswood border, not the kitchen staff." Nathaniel's mouth twitched, almost a smile, though he said nothing further, and returned his attention to the map spread across the table. Elena retreated quietly to her position near the wall, her cheeks warm, unsure whether to feel grateful for Nathaniel's brief kindness, or embarrassed that Damien had noticed it at all. The meeting continued for another hour, discussions of patrol routes and grain shipments blending together into background noise that Elena had long ago learned to tune out. But one exchange near the end caught her attention despite herself. "The council has set a deadline," one of the senior betas said. "If an alliance with Ravenswood is not formalized within the month, they fear war is inevitable. Alpha Cain has made his intentions clear. He wants Blackthorn territory, and he will take it by force, if a peaceful arrangement cannot be reached." Damien's expression darkened. "Victor Cain has wanted this territory since before I was born. A treaty will not satisfy him. Only strength will. Marriage to his daughter would buy us time," Nathaniel said carefully. "Serafina Voss commands respect in her own right. It would not be a weak alliance." Damien said nothing for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the map before him, as though he could somehow force a different solution to appear on its surface, through sheer will alone. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "Arrange it, but I want assurances. Cain does not get this territory through marriage, any more than he would through war." Elena, standing quietly against the wall, felt an unexpected pang of something she could not quite name as she listened. Not jealousy. She had no claim to Damien Ashford's heart, nor any desire for one, not after the way he had treated her the previous night. It was something closer to pity, strange as that seemed. Even the Alpha King, it appeared, was not entirely free to choose his own path. The meeting ended shortly after, and Elena was dismissed to continue her duties, her mind still turning over the conversation she had overheard. War with Ravenswood, a forced marriage to secure peace. It was pack politics far above her station. the kind of decision that would never involve someone like her. Or so she believed, as she carried a stack of dishes back toward the kitchen, unaware that the ancient power stirring within her would soon place her at the very center of everything. That evening, as Elena walked the familiar forest path back to her cottage, she found the silver-haired woman waiting for her beneath the branches of an old oak tree, exactly where the path curved away from the main road. Elena froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the small kitchen knife she carried out of habit rather than any real expectation of danger. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Why are you following me?" "I am not following you," the woman said, her voice calm and warm, carrying a faint accent Elena could not place. "I am waiting for you, which is a different thing entirely." "That doesn't answer my question." The woman smiled, the expression softening the sharp lines of her weathered face. "My name is Clara, and you, Elena Hartley, are the granddaughter of my dearest friend, though you have never known it, and neither has anyone else in this pack." Elena stared at her, uncertain whether to laugh at the absurdity of the claim or feel unsettled by the woman's certainty. "My grandmother died before I was born. Everyone in this pack knows my family history." "Everyone in this pack knows what your family allowed them to know," Clara said gently. "Which is not the same as the truth." She stepped closer, her pale eyes studying Elena's face with an intensity that made Elena want to step back, though something kept her rooted in place. "Tell me, child, have you had strange dreams recently? A wolf, perhaps? Silver fur, eyes like molten gold." Elena's breath caught in her throat. How could you possibly know that? Clara's expression grew serious, all traces of warmth giving way to something graver, something that looked almost like fear. "Because I have been waiting 22 years for that wolf to wake. And now that it has begun, child, we do not have much time before others notice as well." Elena took a step back, her mind racing. "You're not making any sense. My wolf isn't strange. It's weak. Everyone in this pack has known that since I was a child." "Your wolf is not weak," Clara said firmly. "Your wolf has been sleeping, hidden beneath layers of old magic placed there before you could even walk, to keep you safe from people who would want to use you, or worse, destroy you, before you ever understood what you were. What you felt last night in these woods was the first crack in that seal. It will not be the last." "Why would anyone want to hurt me?" Elena asked, though even as she said the words, a cold unease settled in her stomach. "I'm nobody. An Omega who works in the kitchens." Clara's eyes softened with something like sorrow. "You are the last living descendant of the Lunar Kings, child. A bloodline so old and so powerful that most packs today believe it exists only in old stories, told to pups before bed. Your grandmother was the last known lunar queen, and when she died, her enemies believed the bloodline had died with her. They were wrong. It survived in your mother, hidden and suppressed, and it survives now in you." Elena wanted to laugh, wanted to dismiss the entire conversation as the ramblings of a strange old woman who had wandered too far from wherever she truly belonged. But the memory of the dream was still fresh in her mind. The silver wolf, the golden eyes, the warmth that had felt so unlike anything she had ever known in her waking life, and the pull she had felt in the forest, the sensation of something ancient shifting inside her chest, had been too real, too visceral, to dismiss as coincidence. "Even if what you're saying is true," Elena said slowly, "why tell me now? Why not before, if you've known for 22 years? "Because the seal was never meant to last forever," Clara said. "It was designed to hold until you were strong enough, old enough, ready enough to bear the weight of what you carry. Powerful magic like that cannot be rushed without terrible consequences, and because, if I am honest, I hoped you would never need it at all. I hoped you could live a quiet life, safe and unnoticed. But the winds are changing, Elena. War is coming to this territory, and old bloodlines like yours do not remain hidden during times of war. They are needed, or they are hunted, sometimes both." Elena thought of the conversation she had overheard that morning. Ravenswood Pack, Alpha Victor Kane, the threat of war looming over Blackthorn territory like a storm cloud that refused to break. She had assumed it had nothing to do with her. Now she was not so certain. "What do I do?" she asked quietly, the fear in her voice impossible to hide. "For now, nothing," Clara said. "Live your life as you always have. Do not seek the power out. Let it come to you in its own time, gently, the way water finds its path around stone rather than through it. But when it does come, and it will come again, do not fight it, do not fear it. It is not something dangerous inside you, Elena. It is simply you, the truest version of yourself, finally allowed to breathe. Before Elena could ask anything further, Clara turned and walked into the trees, disappearing into the darkness with a quiet grace that seemed impossible for a woman her age. Elena called after her, but there was no answer, only the whisper of wind through the branches and the distant call of a night bird somewhere far above. She stood alone on the path for a long time afterward, her thoughts a tangled storm of disbelief, fear, and something else she could not quite name. Hope, perhaps, though it felt strange and unfamiliar, like a language she had never been taught to speak. Sleep did not come easily that night. Elena lay awake long after her roommates had drifted off, staring at the wooden beams of the cottage ceiling, turning Clara's words over and over in her mind. A Lunar King bloodline, a sealed power. It sounded like something from the old stories the pack elders used to tell around the fire during winter gatherings, tales meant to entertain pups rather than describe anything real. And yet, she thought of the pull she had felt in the forest, sharp and undeniable, unlike anything she had experienced in 22 years of living as an ordinary, unremarkable Omega. She thought of the dream, so vivid it had felt more like memory than imagination. She thought of the strange warmth that had settled in her chest afterward, a feeling she still had not managed to shake even now. If Clara was telling the truth, everything Elena had believed about herself, about her place in the pack, about the very shape of her future, was wrong. She was not weak. She had never been weak. She had simply been hidden, folded away, like a blade kept sheathed, until the moment it was needed. The thought should have terrified her. In some ways, it did. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. A small, fragile spark of something that felt dangerously close to hope. For the first time in her life, Elena allowed herself to wonder what it might feel like to walk into that great hall, not as someone to be mocked and dismissed, but as someone who commanded respect simply by existing. She fell asleep eventually, exhausted by the weight of her own thoughts, and this time, she did not dream of the silver wolf at all. She dreamed instead of her grandmother, a woman she had never known, standing in a field of moonlit grass, smiling at her, with an expression of quiet, unwavering pride. The days that followed passed with deceptive normalcy. Elena returned to her duties in the kitchen, serving meals, scrubbing pots, enduring the same small indignities she had endured for years. Damien largely ignored her, which she was grateful for after the humiliation of the feast, though she noticed Nathaniel watching her more closely than usual during the morning meals, his expression thoughtful, in a way that made her uneasy. She did not see Clara again, though she found herself glancing into the trees each evening as she walked home, half hoping and half fearing that the strange woman would appear once more with more answers, more explanations for the impossible things happening inside her. The pull in her chest returned periodically, faint but unmistakable, usually late at night or in moments of strong emotion. She learned, slowly, to recognize the sensation, and to breathe through it rather than panic, remembering Clara's advice not to fight whatever was happening inside her. It was strange, learning to trust a part of herself she had never known existed, but with each passing day, the fear that had gripped her that first night in the forest began to soften into something closer to curiosity. Word had begun to spread through the pack about the upcoming alliance with Ravenswood, though the details remained vague to most, whispered rather than announced. Elena caught fragments of conversation as she moved through the keep. Talk of a formal engagement between Damien and Serafina Voss. Talk of a summit to be held within the fortnight. Talk of the fragile peace that hung in the balance. She told herself, again and again, that none of it concerned her. She was an Omega, a kitchen worker. Whatever power slept inside her, however real Clara's words might prove to be, Elena Hartley remained, for now, exactly what the pack believed her to be: invisible, unremarkable, easily overlooked. It was a lie she clung to for as long as she could, right up until the night everything changed. The attack came without warning, the way such things always seem to, shattering the fragile illusion of safety Elena had built around her ordinary life. She had been sent, along with 2 other kitchen workers, to gather supplies from a storehouse near the northern edge of pack territory. close enough to the border that the wolves stationed there rarely expected trouble. It was routine work, the kind of task Elena had performed dozens of times without incident. This time was different. The first sign of danger was the silence. The forest around the storehouse, usually alive with the sounds of birds and small animals, had gone completely still. The same unnatural quiet Elena remembered from the night her wolf had first stirred. She exchanged a wary glance with her companions, a young Omega named Lily, and an older man named Owen, who had served as their guard for the journey. "Something's wrong," Owen said quietly, his hand moving instinctively toward the blade at his hip. The attack came a heartbeat later. 3 shifted wolves bursting from the tree line with terrifying speed, their fur marked with the dark gray and black patterns of Ravenswood pack. Owen shifted immediately, his human form giving way to a powerful gray wolf that lunged to meet the attackers head-on, buying precious seconds for Elena and Lily to scramble backward toward the storehouse. "Run!" Owen barked, his voice already strained with effort as he grappled with one of the intruding wolves. Lily bolted toward the trees, but Elena hesitated, frozen by the sight of Owen fighting 2 wolves at once, clearly outmatched despite his strength and skill. She knew she should run. She knew that staying meant risking her own life for someone who could very well die trying to protect her regardless of what she did. But her feet would not move. One of the Ravenswood wolves broke away from the fight and turned toward her, its eyes locking onto hers with predatory focus, and Elena finally understood, with a clarity that cut through her fear like a blade, that she was about to die. The wolf lunged. And something inside Elena, something ancient and long dormant, finally tore free. There was no pain, only light, a blinding flash of silver-white brilliance that seemed to erupt from beneath Elena's skin, so sudden and so bright that even the attacking wolf flinched back, momentarily blinded. Elena felt her body twist and shift in a way that was nothing like the shifts she had experienced before. Faster, smoother, as though her wolf form had simply been waiting beneath the surface all along, needing only permission to emerge. When her vision cleared, Elena was no longer looking at the world through human eyes. She stood on 4 legs, her senses suddenly sharper than anything she had ever known, the scent of fear and blood and pine needles so vivid it was almost overwhelming. She caught a glimpse of her own reflection in a puddle of rainwater nearby, and nearly stumbled in shock. The wolf staring back at her was not the small, dull gray creature she had always known herself to be. Her fur shimmered silver-white, catching what little moonlight filtered through the canopy above, and her eyes burned with the same molten gold she had seen in her dream. The Ravenswood wolf that had lunged at her skidded to a halt, its aggression faltering into something that looked, unmistakably, like fear. Elena did not fully understand what was happening, did not understand the power now coursing through her body, but instinct took over where understanding failed. She let out a sound unlike anything her old wolf form had ever been capable of producing, a deep, resonant howl that seemed to shake the very air around her. The remaining attackers froze. Even Owen, still locked in combat with the second wolf, paused for a fraction of a second, his head turning toward the sound with wide, startled eyes. That fraction of a second was enough. Whatever ancient authority lived within Elena's new form, the Ravenswood wolves recognized it on some primal level, a recognition that overrode their training and their orders. They broke away, one by one, retreating into the tree line with the swiftness of creatures who understood, suddenly and completely, that they had made a terrible miscalculation. Elena stood alone in the small clearing, her chest heaving, her new body trembling with the aftershock of whatever had just happened. She looked down at her paws, silver and unfamiliar, and felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The last thing she remembered clearly was Owen's voice calling her name, followed by darkness closing in from the edges of her vision. She woke sometime later in her human form, lying on a cot in the pack's healing hall, her body aching in ways she could not fully explain. Lily sat nearby, her face pale with worry, and Owen stood near the doorway, his expression unreadable. "What happened?" Elena asked, her voice hoarse. "That's what we were hoping you could tell us," Owen said carefully. "You shifted into something none of us have ever seen before. Silver fur, gold eyes. You scared off 3 Ravenswood wolves without so much as touching them." Elena's stomach dropped. She had hoped, foolishly, that perhaps the entire experience had been some kind of fever dream, a product of fear and adrenaline rather than something real. But the way Owen and Lily were looking at her told her otherwise. I don't remember much, Elena admitted, which was mostly true. The details of the transformation itself remained hazy, fragments of light and sound rather than a clear memory. I just remember being afraid, and then everything changed. The healers examined you while you were unconscious, Lily said quietly. They couldn't find anything wrong with you. Physically, you're fine, but word is already spreading about what happened at the storehouse. Elena closed her eyes, dread settling heavy in her stomach. She had hoped for more time, more chances to understand whatever was happening to her before the rest of the pack became involved. That hope, it seemed, had already slipped away. Does the Alpha know? She asked. Owen's silence was answer enough. Elena was summoned to the Alpha's private study later that same day, a room she had entered only a handful of times in her life, always to deliver food or clean in the Alpha's absence. Standing before Damien Ashford now, waiting for judgment rather than delivering a meal, felt entirely different. Damien sat behind a heavy wooden desk, his expression difficult to read, somewhere between suspicion and genuine confusion. Nathaniel stood near the window, his arms crossed, watching Elena with the same careful curiosity he had shown during the morning meals. Tell me what happened at the storehouse, Damien said, his voice sharper than Elena had expected, though not unkind, which surprised her. Elena recounted the attack as best she could, the details still fractured and incomplete in her memory. She left out nothing she remembered clearly, though there was little enough to tell. The ambush, Owen's efforts to protect them, the wolf that had lunged at her, and then the strange, overwhelming light that had followed. Owen claims you shifted into a wolf unlike anything he has ever seen in this pack, Damien said when she finished. Silver fur, golden eyes. He says the attacking wolves fled the moment they saw you, without you so much as raising a claw against them. I don't understand it either, Elena said honestly. I don't know what happened. One moment I thought I was going to die, and the next, everything changed. Damien studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face as though looking for some sign of deception. Elena forced herself not to look away, though every instinct told her to lower her gaze the way she always had in his presence. I saw it too, Damien said finally, his voice quieter now. Not clearly. From a distance, as I arrived with reinforcements after receiving word of the attack, but I saw enough to know that Owen was not exaggerating. Nathaniel spoke up from the window. There are old stories about bloodlines capable of such transformations, bloodlines thought lost centuries ago. Damien's gaze flicked toward Nathaniel, sharp and questioning, before returning to Elena. Do you know something about your family history that you have not shared with this pack? Elena hesitated, thinking of Clara, of the impossible claims about lunar kings and ancient bloodlines. She was not ready to share that information, not yet, not until she understood it better herself, and certainly not with the man who had humiliated her in front of the entire pack only days earlier. No, she said, the lie feeling heavier than she expected. I know nothing more than what I've already told you. Damien's expression remained unreadable, but he did not press further, which Elena took as a small mercy. You will remain here in the keep for now, he said instead, under watch, until we understand more about what happened. This is not a punishment, he added, seeing the flicker of alarm cross her face. But if there is any truth to old stories about lost bloodlines, I would rather understand what we are dealing with, before word spreads further and draws attention we cannot control. Elena nodded, though the idea of remaining under constant watch, of being studied and observed, rather than simply overlooked, unsettled her deeply. She had spent her entire life trying to remain invisible. The thought of losing that invisibility entirely, of becoming the center of attention in a pack that had never valued her, felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, with no way to see how far the fall might be. She was dismissed shortly after, and as she made her way back toward the kitchens, uncertain of what her new duties under watch might entail, she caught Damien's voice through the partially closed study door behind her. Find out everything you can about the Lunar King bloodline, he said to Nathaniel. Quietly, if she truly carries that blood, this changes everything, and I would rather learn the truth before the council does. News of the attack, and Elena's transformation, spread through Blackthorn Pack with surprising speed, despite Damien's efforts to contain it. By the following evening, whispers followed Elena wherever she walked. curious glances replacing the dismissive ones she had grown so accustomed to over the years. Some of the pack members regarded her with something close to awe. Others regarded her with open suspicion, as though her sudden and unexplained power made her dangerous rather than remarkable. Elena found the attention almost unbearable. She had spent her entire life being overlooked, and while that invisibility had often felt like a wound, it had also, in its own strange way, felt safe. Now that safety was gone, replaced by a constant, uncomfortable awareness of eyes following her every move. She sought out Clara that evening, slipping away from the keep under the guise of gathering firewood, desperate for answers from the only person who seemed to understand what was happening to her. She found the older woman waiting near the same oak tree as before, as though she had somehow known Elena would come. "You shifted," Clara said before Elena could speak, her expression grave. "Sooner than I expected. The seal is breaking faster than it should." "3 wolves attacked me," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly as the memory returned. "I thought I was going to die, and then everything just changed. I don't understand what happened, Clara. I don't understand any of this." "Fear and danger are powerful triggers for dormant magic," Clara said, "especially magic tied so closely to survival instinct. Your wolf recognized the threat to your life and acted to protect you, even before your conscious mind understood what was happening." "The alpha knows something is different about me now," Elena said. "He's asked his beta to look into old stories about the Lunar King bloodline. If he learns the truth." "He will learn it eventually regardless," Clara interrupted gently. "Power like yours cannot remain hidden forever, not now that the seal has begun to break. Better that you understand the truth of your own heritage before others explain it to you, in ways that serve their own purposes rather than yours." Elena felt a chill settle over her, despite the warmth of the summer evening. "What do you mean?" Clara's expression grew serious, the warmth in her pale eyes giving way to something harder, something that looked almost like fear. "There are those who would see the Lunar King bloodline restored to power, child, and those who would see it destroyed forever rather than risk its return. You must be careful who you trust with the truth of what you are, even here, even among wolves who claim loyalty to this pack." "Even Damien?" Elena asked quietly. Clara did not answer immediately, her silence heavier than any words could have been. "Especially him," she said finally. "An alpha king who discovers his weakest omega, carries a bloodline more powerful than his own, is not likely to react with simple curiosity, Elena. Power unsettles those who have built their entire identity around commanding it. Watch him carefully. Trust him slowly, if you trust him at all." Elena thought of the way Damien had looked at her in his study, the careful, searching quality of his gaze, so different from the contempt he had shown her at the feast only days earlier. She did not know what to make of the change, whether it signaled genuine curiosity or something more calculating. "There is something else you should know," Clara continued, her voice dropping lower. "The transformation you experienced at the storehouse was only a fragment of your true power, triggered by instinct rather than intention. When your wolf fully awakens, when you learn to call upon it deliberately rather than only in moments of desperate fear, you will understand strength beyond anything this pack has ever witnessed, beyond anything Damien Ashford himself possesses." "How do I learn to control it?" Elena asked. "I don't even understand what happened. How am I supposed to learn to call it on purpose?" "Patience," Clara said, "and trust in yourself, which I suspect will prove the more difficult lesson of the two. You have spent your entire life believing yourself weak, Elena. Unlearning that belief will take time, regardless of how much power now lives within you." They spoke for a while longer, Clara offering what guidance she could, though much of it remained frustratingly vague, warnings and hints rather than clear answers. Elena returned to the keep well after dark, her mind heavy with new questions that seemed only to multiply rather than resolve. She did not notice, as she slipped back through the kitchen entrance, the figure watching from the shadows near the tree line, having observed her entire conversation with Clara from a careful distance. Nathaniel reported what he had witnessed to Damien later that same night, in the privacy of the Alpha's study, the two men speaking in low voices despite there being no one else present to overhear. "She met with an old woman in the forest," Nathaniel said. "They spoke for nearly an hour. I could not hear everything, but I caught enough to confirm what we suspected. The woman spoke of a bloodline, Lunar Kings. She called it Elena's true heritage. Damien was silent for a long moment, staring at the map spread across his desk without truly seeing it. The Lunar King bloodline was believed extinct for over a century, he said finally. If it has survived, hidden within an Omega serving in my own kitchens, the implications reach far beyond this pack alone. What do you intend to do? Nathaniel asked. Damien's jaw tightened, old habits of authority and control warring visibly with something else, something closer to uncertainty, an emotion Nathaniel had rarely witnessed in his alpha before. Watch her, he said finally. Closely, but from a distance. I want to understand what she is capable of before I decide anything further. And Nathaniel, find out who that old woman is. If she has been hiding a Lunar King heir within Blackthorn territory for over 2 decades, I want to know why, and I want to know what else she might be hiding from me. Nathaniel nodded and left the study without further comment, leaving Damien alone with his thoughts and the flickering candlelight that cast long shadows across the map before him. The Alpha King sat in silence for a long while afterward, turning over a memory he had not expected to resurface. The sneer he had offered Elena at the feast, the cruel words he had spoken so easily, so thoughtlessly, believing her too insignificant to matter. He thought of the silver-white wolf Owen had described, of the brief glimpse he himself had caught from a distance, molten gold eyes cutting through the darkness with an authority that had, for just a moment, made even his own wolf instinct want to bow. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Damien Ashford felt something uncomfortably close to doubt. Days passed, and Elena found herself living a strange, uneven existence between 2 worlds. By day, she continued her duties in the kitchens, though the other staff now treated her with a wary distance that felt almost worse than the outright mockery she had endured before. By night, she practiced alone in a small clearing not far from her cottage, trying, with limited success, to summon even a fraction of the power that had exploded from her so violently at the storehouse. Nothing happened. Night after night, she stood in the darkness, focusing every ounce of concentration she possessed, waiting for the pull in her chest to return, waiting for the silver light to answer her call. It never did. The power that had saved her life seemed to exist entirely outside her control, arriving only when fear demanded it, and vanishing the moment danger passed. "You're trying too hard," Clara told her one evening, appearing at the edge of the clearing, as she often did now, seemingly drawn by some instinct of her own. "Power like yours cannot be forced, it must be invited." "I don't know how to invite something I don't understand," Elena said, frustration bleeding into her voice. "I don't even know what I am, Clara, not really. You've told me about bloodlines and seals and ancient kings, but none of that explains how I'm supposed to control any of it." Clara settled onto a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, her expression thoughtful. "Tell me about the dream," she said. "The wolf you saw before your first shift, what did it feel like, being in its presence?" Elena considered the question carefully. "Warm," she said finally. "Safe, like being seen for the first time in my life, like it already knew everything about me, and didn't judge any of it." "That feeling," Clara said, "is your wolf. Not a separate creature living inside you, waiting to take control, but the truest, deepest part of yourself, the part that has never once believed the lies this pack has told you about your own worth. When you shifted at the storehouse, it was not power responding to fear alone. It was that part of you, finally strong enough to answer when you needed it most." "Then why won't it answer now?" Elena asked. "Because you are still asking it the wrong question," Clara said. "You keep asking it to prove your strength. Instead, you must learn to simply accept that the strength already exists within you, waiting only for you to stop doubting it." Elena closed her eyes, trying to quiet the constant, nagging voice in her mind that still insisted, after so many years of being told the same thing, that she was weak, unremarkable, undeserving of power or respect. It was harder than she expected, unlearning a belief that had shaped every corner of her identity since childhood. She did not shift that night, nor the night after, but slowly, gradually, she began to notice small changes, her senses sharpening at unexpected moments, her reflexes quicker than they had ever been, a quiet, steady warmth settling in her chest that had not been there before. The power was there, waiting, even if she had not yet learned to call it forward on her own. The Pack Council convened a week later to formalize the terms of the alliance with Ravenswood territory, a meeting Elena had no reason to attend, though rumors of its outcome reached the kitchens within hours. Damien Ashford and Serafina Voss would be formally engaged. The union intended to secure peace between the two territories and prevent the war that had loomed over Blackthorn for months. Elena told herself the news meant nothing to her. She had no claim on Damien, no reason to feel anything at all about his engagement to a powerful alpha's daughter from a rival territory. And yet, when she caught sight of him later that day, walking the halls with a grim, resigned expression, entirely unlike his usual arrogant confidence, she felt an unexpected pang of sympathy she had not anticipated. Their paths crossed near the kitchen entrance as she carried a tray of supplies toward the storage room. Damien paused, his dark eyes settling on her with an intensity that made her steps falter. "How are you adjusting?" he asked, the question surprising her with its simplicity, stripped of the cruelty that had colored nearly every previous interaction between them. "Well enough," Elena said carefully, unsure how to navigate this unfamiliar territory of civil conversation with a man who had humiliated her so thoroughly only weeks earlier. Given the circumstances, Damien's mouth tightened, something like guilt flickering briefly across his features before he schooled his expression back into careful neutrality. "I heard about the attack in full detail from Owen," he said. "You saved his life as much as your own, whether you intended to or not. The Ravenswood wolves would have overwhelmed him without your intervention." "I didn't do anything on purpose," Elena said honestly. "I don't even understand what happened." "Neither do I," Damien admitted, which surprised her further. "But I intend to understand it, Elena. Whatever you are, whatever bloodline you carry, it matters to this pack's future now, whether either of us wanted that or not." Elena studied him carefully, searching for the calculating edge Clara had warned her to watch for, the ambition that might lie beneath his sudden interest. She found, instead, something that looked almost like genuine uncertainty. An alpha king confronting a truth that threatened to unravel everything he believed about strength, power, and the order of the world he ruled. "I should return to my duties," Elena said finally, uncomfortable with the strange vulnerability of the moment. Damien nodded, stepping aside to let her pass, though his eyes followed her longer than she expected, as she continued down the corridor. The formal engagement ceremony between Damien and Serafina was scheduled to take place within the fortnight, a grand affair intended to demonstrate unity between Blackthorn and Ravenswood territories before the watching eyes of the wider wolf community. Elena predictably was assigned to help with the preparations, spending long hours arranging flowers and polishing silverware for a celebration she had no desire to attend even as a servant. Serafina Voss arrived at the keep 3 days before the ceremony, accompanied by a modest retinue of Ravenswood wolves. Elena caught only brief glimpses of her from a distance. A tall, elegant woman with sharp, calculating eyes and an air of quiet confidence that suggested she was fully aware of her own value in the arrangement being made around her. She did not seem particularly pleased about the engagement either, though her displeasure manifested as cold composure rather than the visible reluctance Damien sometimes betrayed. Word around the keep suggested that Serafina's father, Alpha Victor Kane, had orchestrated the entire alliance, not out of any genuine desire for peace, but as a calculated first step toward eventually absorbing Blackthorn territory entirely, using his daughter's marriage as a foothold rather than a final resolution. Elena had no way to confirm such rumors, but the tension radiating from Damien in the days leading up to the ceremony suggested he shared similar concerns. "Something feels wrong about this alliance," Elena confided to Clara one evening, having grown accustomed to their regular meetings in the forest clearing. "Everyone seems to be preparing for peace, but it feels more like everyone is preparing for war." "Trust that instinct," Clara said. "Peace built on fear and calculation rarely holds for long. Victor Kane has coveted Blackthorn territory for decades. A marriage will not change the ambition of a man who has spent his entire life pursuing power at any cost." "Should I warn Damien?" Elena asked, surprising herself with the question. Clara considered this carefully. "Would he listen to you, do you think, given everything that has passed between you?" Elena thought of their recent conversation near the kitchen entrance, the careful civility that had replaced his earlier cruelty, though she remained uncertain whether that shift reflected genuine change or simple pragmatism given her newly discovered power. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "Then perhaps it is not yet time to test that trust," Clara said. "Watch carefully during the ceremony, Elena. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong. but be cautious about revealing more of yourself than necessary, until you better understand where true loyalties lie within this alliance. The night before the engagement ceremony, Elena found herself unable to sleep, her mind restless with a vague, unsettling premonition she could not quite name. She rose quietly, careful not to wake her roommates, and slipped outside into the cool night air, drawn by some instinct toward the forest path she had walked so many times before. She did not find Clara waiting this time. Instead, she found herself simply walking, following no particular direction, until she reached the edge of a small ridge overlooking the eastern border of Blackthorn territory, close to where the boundary line met Ravenswood lands. From her vantage point, Elena could see movement in the darkness below, shapes moving through the trees with a coordinated precision that immediately set every instinct in her body on alert. She counted at least a dozen wolves, moving in careful formation along the border, far more than any routine patrol would require. Her heart began to pound as she realized what she was witnessing. This was not a patrol. This was the positioning of forces, quiet and deliberate, the kind of movement that preceded an attack rather than accompanied peaceful negotiations. Elena knew she needed to warn someone, and quickly, but the distance back to the keep would take too long on foot, and she had no way to summon her wolf form deliberately. Not yet, not without the same desperate fear that had triggered her first transformation. She took a steadying breath, remembering Clara's words. Stop asking it to prove your strength. Simply accept that the strength already exists. She closed her eyes, focusing not on fear this time, but on the memory of that warm, steady feeling from her dream, the sense of being truly seen, truly herself, for the first time in her life. She thought of Owen, of Lily, of everyone in the pack who might be in danger if these forces moved forward with whatever plan they were executing. She thought, unexpectedly, of Damien, and the strange, fragile trust beginning to form between them. The pull came slowly this time, gentle rather than violent, spreading warmth through her chest, before easing into something that felt almost like an invitation, rather than an eruption. Elena opened her eyes, and found herself already mid-transformation, her body shifting smoothly, deliberately, into the silver-white wolf form she had glimpsed only once before, in the chaos of the storehouse attack. This time, she felt fully present within the transformation, fully aware of every sensation, as her body settled into its new shape. She looked down at her paws, silver and steady in the moonlight, and felt, for the first time in her entire life, something that might genuinely be called confidence. She turned toward the keep and ran, faster than she had ever moved in her old wolf form, the wind rushing past her as the trees blurred into streaks of shadow on either side. She reached the outer walls within minutes, shifting back to human form just long enough to alert the first guard she encountered, breathless and urgent. Ravenswood forces are massing along the eastern border, she gasped. At least a dozen wolves, moving in formation. It's not a patrol. The guard's eyes widened before he turned and sounded the alarm, the deep, resonant horn call echoing across the keep and rousing the pack from sleep with startling speed. Within minutes, Damien himself appeared, already half-dressed, his expression sharp with the particular focus of a man accustomed to sudden crisis. "Report," he said, his eyes finding Elena immediately among the gathering guards. "Eastern border," Elena said. "I saw them from the ridge. They're not patrolling, Damien. They're preparing to attack." Damien's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Elena saw something flicker across his face that looked almost like betrayal, the realization that the alliance he had reluctantly agreed to, the marriage he had accepted for the sake of peace, might have been nothing more than a calculated distraction all along. "Gather the guard," he ordered, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "Full defensive positions along the eastern wall, now." The keep erupted into controlled chaos, wolves shifting and mobilizing with practiced efficiency, despite the lateness of the hour. Elena stood at the edge of the courtyard, uncertain of her role in the unfolding crisis, until Damien turned back toward her, his expression unreadable in the flickering torchlight. "You saw them clearly?" he asked. "You're certain of what you witnessed?" "I'm certain," Elena said firmly, no trace of her usual hesitation in her voice. Damien studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his dark eyes, an acknowledgement that seemed to reach beyond the immediate crisis toward something deeper, something that had been slowly changing between them since the night of the storehouse attack. Stay close to me, he said finally, surprising her. Whatever is coming, I would rather have you where I can see you than hidden away in the kitchens, wondering what's happening beyond these walls. Elena nodded, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something else, something that felt dangerously close to purpose, as the first horn calls of impending battle echoed through the night air around them. The eastern wall of Blackthorn Keep had not seen real conflict in over a decade, and Elena could feel the tension radiating from every wolf gathered along its length, weapons and claws ready, eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the border markers. She stood near Damien, as he had instructed, though she felt distinctly out of place among the seasoned warriors surrounding them, her only weapon the uncertain power still settling unfamiliarly within her chest. They may simply be testing our defenses, Nathaniel said quietly, positioning himself on Damien's other side. Cain has done this before, probing for weakness without committing to open conflict. And if this time is different? Damien asked, his eyes never leaving the darkness beyond the wall. Nathaniel did not answer, which was answer enough. They did not have to wait long. The Ravenswood wolves emerged from the tree line perhaps 20 minutes later, moving with the same coordinated precision Elena had witnessed from the ridge, though their numbers had grown since her initial sighting. She counted at least 20 now, their dark fur barely visible against the shadowed forest behind them, moonlight catching only the occasional glint of watchful eyes. A single wolf broke from the formation and shifted into human form at the borderline, a broad-shouldered man Elena recognized, from whispered descriptions around the keep, as Alpha Victor Cain himself. He raised both hands in a gesture that might have looked peaceful, were it not for the 20 wolves arrayed behind him. Alpha Ashford, Cain called across the distance, his voice carrying easily on the still night air. I hope you'll forgive the late hour. I merely wish to inspect the border we will soon be sharing more closely, given the upcoming union between our families. Strange hour for an inspection, Damien called back, stepping forward to the edge of the wall, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. Stranger still, to bring 20 wolves for a simple border walk. Cain's smile did not waver. A man in my position cannot be too careful, Alpha Ashford. I'm sure you understand. I understand a threat when I see one, Damien said, his voice hardening. Withdraw your wolves from this border, Cain, or explain to me exactly what kind of inspection requires this show of force. For a long, tense moment, neither man moved, the standoff stretching thin enough that Elena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then Cain's expression shifted, the pleasant mask slipping just enough to reveal something colder beneath. Very well, Cain said. Since diplomacy seems to hold little value with you, Alpha Ashford, let me speak plainly. Blackthorn territory has grown weak under your leadership. Your council whispers of internal division. Your alliance with my daughter was meant to strengthen your position, but I have come to believe it would strengthen mine far more effectively if I simply took what I wanted, rather than waited for a marriage to grant it to me slowly. The words had barely left his mouth before the Ravenswood wolves surged forward, and the fragile illusion of a diplomatic standoff shattered into open conflict. The battle that followed unfolded in chaotic bursts of motion and sound, wolves clashing along the length of the eastern wall, as Blackthorn's defenders fought to repel the sudden assault. Elena found herself pulled into the fighting almost immediately, her human form proving dangerously inadequate against the ferocity of the attacking wolves. She shifted, without conscious thought this time, her body responding to the surge of adrenaline and fear with an ease that surprised her, silver-white fur rippling across her skin as she dropped into her wolf form mid-motion, narrowly avoiding the snapping jaws of an attacking Ravenswood wolf. The fight that followed blurred into instinct and sensation rather than clear memory. Elena moved through the chaos with a speed and precision she had never possessed before, her new strength allowing her to hold her own against wolves twice her former size, her presence alone seeming to unsettle the attackers in ways she did not fully understand. More than once, she caught Ravenswood wolves hesitating at the sight of her, their aggression faltering into something closer to wariness before they redirected their attacks elsewhere. She fought her way toward Damien, who had shifted into his own formidable wolf form, a massive dark-furred creature, engaged in fierce combat with two Ravenswood attackers simultaneously. Elena intervened just as one of the attackers moved to strike at Damien's exposed flank, tackling the wolf aside with a force that surprised even her, sending it tumbling several feet before it scrambled back to its feet and retreated toward the tree line. Damien finished off his remaining opponent moments later, and for a brief pause in the chaos around them, their eyes met, silver gold meeting deep brown, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them that needed no words. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was likely closer to 20 minutes. Blackthorn's defenders gradually gaining the upper hand as reinforcements arrived from deeper within the territory. Victor Kane, recognizing the shifting tide, called for his remaining forces to retreat, disappearing back into the darkness of the forest with the same coordinated precision that had marked their arrival. Silence fell over the border once the last of the Ravenswood wolves had vanished, broken only by the labored breathing of exhausted defenders and the distant sound of injured wolves being tended by the pack's healers. Elena shifted back to human form, her legs trembling with exhaustion, and found Damien already watching her, his own transformation complete, his expression a complicated mixture of relief, gratitude, and something else she could not quite name. "You saved my life tonight," he said quietly, stepping closer, despite the chaos still unfolding around them. "Twice, if I'm counting correctly. Once with your warning, and once during the fighting itself." "I didn't do it alone," Elena said, suddenly self-conscious under the weight of his attention. "The entire pack fought tonight. The entire pack did not intervene between me and an attacking wolf without hesitation," Damien said. "Whatever you are, Elena, whatever bloodline runs through your veins, I owe you a debt I do not know how to properly repay." Before Elena could respond, Nathaniel approached, his expression grim despite the successful defense. "We've counted our losses," he said. 3 wounded seriously, though the healers believe all will survive. No fatalities on our side, which is more than we had any right to expect against a force that size." "And Kane's forces?" Damien asked. "Retreated in full," Nathaniel confirmed, "though I suspect this was only the opening move in whatever game he's playing. An engagement ceremony, followed by an attempted border incursion on the same week, suggests careful planning, rather than opportunistic aggression." Damien's jaw tightened, his gaze drifting toward the keep, where Serafina Voss remained, presumably unaware that her own father had just attempted to seize Blackthorn territory by force. "Bring Serafina to my study," he said finally. "I want to know whether she was aware of her father's plans, and I want to know now, before the council convenes to discuss our response." The following hours brought little rest for anyone within Blackthorn Keep. Elena found herself swept up in the aftermath of the battle, helping tend to the wounded despite her exhaustion, unable to simply retreat to her cottage while others continued working around her. It was during this time that she first noticed the shift in how the pack regarded her. Wolves who had barely acknowledged her existence weeks earlier now offered quiet words of gratitude as she moved among them, some bowing their heads slightly as she passed, a gesture of respect she had never once received in her 22 years within the pack. It felt strange, uncomfortable even, this sudden reversal of a lifetime of being overlooked, and Elena found herself uncertain how to receive it gracefully. Not everyone shared this newfound respect, however. She overheard fragments of conversation among some of the older pack elders as she passed through the healing hall, their voices low but not quite quiet enough to escape her sharpened senses. "An Omega, shifting into something that powerful," one elder murmured to another, suspicion evident in his tone. "It isn't natural. The old bloodlines were said to carry curses alongside their gifts. We should be cautious before we start bowing to a power we don't understand." "The Alpha seems taken with her," the second elder replied. "Watch how he looks at her now, after everything that happened tonight. If he elevates her status without fully understanding what she is, he risks the stability of this entire pack." Elena moved past quickly, her chest tight with the familiar sting of being doubted, even now, even after risking her life to warn the pack of the coming attack. Some things, it seemed, would not change as easily as she had hoped. She found Clara waiting for her near the healing hall's entrance sometime after midnight, the older woman's expression grave despite the successful defense of the border. "You shifted deliberately tonight," Clara said, without preamble. "Not from fear alone, but from purpose. That is significant progress, Elena. More than I expected this quickly." "It doesn't feel like progress," Elena admitted, exhaustion bleeding into her voice. "Some of the elders think my power is a curse rather than a gift." They're afraid of what I am. Fear is a natural response to power they do not understand, Clara said. It will fade with time, as they come to see the truth of who you are, rather than the legends they've heard about what you might be. But be patient, child. Trust is built slowly, especially in a pack that has spent your entire life believing the opposite of what tonight has proven. And Damien? Elena asked quietly. What do I do about him? Clara studied her for a long moment, her pale eyes searching Elena's face with an intensity that made Elena want to look away. That, she said finally, is a question only you can answer, child. Though I suspect, from what I have observed tonight, that the answer is already beginning to form within you, whether you're ready to acknowledge it or not. Elena did not respond, though the warmth that spread through her chest at the memory of Damien's gratitude, of the way his eyes had held hers in the aftermath of battle, told her that Clara's observation was not entirely wrong. Serafina Voss arrived at Damien's study within the hour, escorted by 2 guards who remained stationed at the door despite her calm, unhurried demeanor. Elena had been asked to remain nearby, ostensibly to help with any translation of Ravenswood customs the negotiation might require, though she suspected Damien simply wanted her present as a witness he could trust. I assume you already know why I've summoned you, Damien said, his voice carefully controlled despite the anger simmering beneath it. My father attacked your border tonight, Serafina said, her expression unreadable. I was informed only after the fact, by one of my own guards who feared I would be blamed for his actions. Convenient timing, Damien said, given that this attack occurred during the very week meant to celebrate our alliance. Serafina's composure cracked, just slightly, revealing a flash of genuine anger beneath the careful mask she had maintained since her arrival. You believe I orchestrated an attack against my own engagement ceremony? Against a marriage my father has spent months arranging for his own political benefit? I believe, Damien said carefully, that your father has used this alliance as cover for an attempted invasion, and I would like to understand whether his daughter shares his ambitions, or merely his blood. I share neither his ambitions nor his methods, Serafina said, her voice sharp now. I have spent my entire life watching my father sacrifice everything and everyone around him, in pursuit of power he already has more than enough of. This marriage was never meant to be a genuine alliance, Alpha Ashford. It was meant to be a foothold, exactly as you suspected. I agreed to it because refusing would have meant worse consequences for myself, and for those loyal to me within Ravenswood territory, not because I share my father's vision for what comes after. The study fell silent for a long moment, Damien studying Serafina, with an expression that had shifted from suspicion toward something more complicated. Elena, standing quietly near the window, found herself surprised by a flicker of sympathy for the other woman, recognizing something familiar in the trapped, resigned quality of her words. If that's true, Damien said finally, then you understand that this alliance, as originally planned, is no longer viable. Your father declared open hostility against Blackthorn territory tonight. I cannot in good conscience proceed with a marriage that would only strengthen his position. I understand, Serafina said, something like relief flickering briefly across her features, before she schooled her expression back into careful neutrality. For what it's worth, Alpha Ashford, I never wanted this marriage any more than you did. If you're offering me a way out of it, I will not object. Damien nodded slowly. You and your retinue will be given safe passage to leave Blackthorn territory in the morning. What you do from there, whether you return to your father or seek shelter elsewhere, is your own decision. Serafina studied him for a moment longer, before her gaze shifted to Elena, standing quietly by the window. You're the one they're already whispering about, she said, not unkindly. The wolf who shifted into something none of them had ever seen before. Elena felt her cheeks warm under the sudden attention. I suppose so, she said. Be careful, Serafina said, her voice dropping lower, meant only for Elena, despite the others present in the room. My father has spies within nearly every pack territory in this region, including this one. If word of what you are reaches him before you're ready to face him, he will see you as a far greater prize than Blackthorn territory alone. A Lunar King bloodline, restored after all these years, is the kind of power that could reshape the balance of this entire region. He will not simply let that possibility exist unclaimed. Elena's stomach twisted at the warning, though she managed a small nod of acknowledgement. Serafina held her gaze for a moment longer before turning and departing the study, her guards falling into step behind her. Once she had gone, Damien turned to Elena, his expression troubled. "You should have told me sooner," he said, though there was no anger in his voice, only quiet concern. "About the bloodline. About everything Clara has been teaching you. I wasn't sure I could trust you with it," Elena admitted honestly. "Not after everything that happened between us before." Damien's expression flickered with something that looked almost like shame. "I understand," he said quietly. "I gave you every reason to doubt me, and I cannot undo the cruelty I showed you before any of this began. But Elena, if what Serafina says is true, if Victor Kane learns what you are, you will need every ally this pack can offer, myself included. I would rather earn your trust honestly than have you discover too late that you needed it and hesitated to ask." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any trace of the calculating ambition Clara had warned her about. She found, instead, something that looked genuinely sincere, an alpha king, grappling with the uncomfortable realization that his own past behavior had made him less trustworthy in the eyes of someone who now held more power than he did. "I'll consider it," she said finally, which was more honesty than she had offered him in weeks. Elena sought out Clara again, that same night, unable to shake the weight of Serafina's warning, desperate for a fuller understanding of exactly what danger she now faced. She found the older woman in the small clearing where they had met so many times before, waiting as though she had already anticipated Elena's need for answers. "Tell me everything," Elena said, settling onto the fallen log across from Clara. "All of it. No more riddles. No more partial truths. I need to understand what I am and what I'm facing, completely, before I make any more decisions that affect not just myself but this entire pack." Clara studied her for a long moment, before nodding slowly, as though recognizing that the time for careful, measured revelations had finally passed. "Very well," she said. "The Lunar King bloodline traces back over 1,000 years, to a time when wolf packs were ruled not by strength of claw and fang alone, but by a deeper connection to the moon itself, a power passed down through certain bloodlines that allowed its bearers to command respect and loyalty on an almost instinctive level. Lunar kings and queens were not simply strong. They were recognized, by wolves and nature alike, as rightful leaders in a way that transcended ordinary pack hierarchy. "Why did the bloodline disappear?" Elena asked. "It did not disappear so much as it was hunted nearly to extinction," Clara said, her voice heavy with old sorrow. "As pack territories grew and fractured over the centuries, ambitious alphas began to see the lunar bloodline as a threat rather than a blessing, a power capable of uniting disparate packs under a single rightful ruler, rather than allowing individual alphas to maintain their own smaller kingdoms. A great purge occurred nearly 2 centuries ago, when several powerful alpha families conspired together to hunt down and eliminate every known descendant of the Lunar Kings, fearing the day one among them might rise to challenge their fractured, individual authority. But some survived, Elena said. "Some survived," Clara confirmed. "In hiding, their true nature concealed even from themselves in many cases, the power deliberately sealed away by protective magic to keep both the bearer and those around them safe from discovery. Your grandmother was among the last known lunar queens to walk openly in the world, before she too was forced into hiding after an assassination attempt nearly claimed her life. She spent her remaining years teaching me everything she knew about the bloodline, preparing me to protect whoever might carry it forward after her, never suspecting that her own daughter, and later her granddaughter, would carry that same power hidden within her own blood." "My mother knew?" Elena asked, surprised. Her mother had died when Elena was young, a hunting accident the pack elders had explained, though Elena had never questioned the details too closely. "Your mother knew," Clara confirmed. "She chose to keep her own power sealed for your protection, believing that a quiet, ordinary life offered you a safer future than the dangerous legacy of the lunar bloodline. She died protecting that secret, Elena, in circumstances far more complicated than the simple accident this pack was told." Elena felt a cold weight settle in her chest at this revelation, years of assumed history suddenly recontextualized into something far darker and more deliberate than she had ever imagined. "Someone killed my mother because of what she was," she said slowly, the realization settling heavily over her. "I believe so," Clara said gently, "though I have never been able to confirm the truth with certainty. What I do know is that the danger which claimed her has not disappeared simply because the years have passed. If Victor Kane, or anyone else seeking to claim or destroy the lunar bloodline, learns the truth of what you carry, you will face the same danger your mother once faced, and I fear my own protection alone will not be enough to keep you safe this time. Then what do I do? Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara reached out and took Elena's hands in her own, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman her age. You stop hiding, she said firmly. You stop asking permission to be powerful. The seal that once protected you now endangers you, Elena, because a hidden power discovered by enemies is far more vulnerable than a power openly claimed and defended. You must learn to fully embrace what you are, not just in moments of fear or desperate necessity, but as the truest, deepest expression of your own identity. Only then will you have any hope of protecting yourself and everyone you care about from what is coming. Elena sat in silence for a long while after Clara finished speaking, the weight of everything she had learned settling heavily over her exhausted mind. 1,000 years of history. A grandmother she had never known, a mother whose death carried a darker truth than she had ever suspected. And now, resting entirely on her own shoulders, the responsibility of carrying a bloodline that powerful men across the region would either seek to claim or seek to destroy. It should have terrified her. In many ways, it did. But beneath the fear, Elena felt something else beginning to take shape, something she had never truly possessed before, in her 22 years of quiet, overlooked existence. Purpose. The days following Clara's revelations brought a subtle but unmistakable shift in Elena's demeanor. She no longer flinched when pack members' eyes lingered on her a moment too long. She no longer lowered her gaze reflexively in the presence of those ranked above her. The change was small, almost imperceptible to anyone who had not known her before, but Damien noticed it immediately during their increasingly frequent conversations, a new steadiness in her posture, a new clarity in her voice. "You're different," he observed one evening, as they walked together along the eastern wall, now heavily reinforced following the attempted attack. "Something has changed since the night Serafina left. I've stopped waiting for permission to believe in myself," Elena said simply. "Clara helped me understand that hiding what I am has only ever made me more vulnerable, not safer." Damien was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "Not just for the way I treated you before, though certainly for that as well, but for assuming, all these years, that strength only comes in the forms I recognized as familiar, claws and fangs and dominance displays. I never once considered that quiet endurance, the kind you've shown your entire life within this pack, might be its own form of strength." Elena studied him carefully, surprised by the depth of reflection in his words. "That's the first time you've apologized to me directly," she said. "Not just implied regret, but actually said the words." "I know," Damien said, something like genuine shame crossing his features. "I should have said them long before now." "Thank you," Elena said, and meant it, though the wound from years of humiliation had not fully healed, simply because of a single apology, however sincere. Trust, as Clara had told her, would take time to rebuild, regardless of how quickly the circumstances around them seemed to be changing. Their conversation was interrupted by Nathaniel's approach, his expression grave. "We've intercepted a message meant for Ravenswood territory," he said, without preamble. "Intelligence suggests Kane is planning something larger than the border skirmish. A formal summit has been called between several regional pack leaders, meant to address rising tensions following the failed alliance. We believe Kane intends to use the summit as an opportunity to expose Elena's bloodline publicly, forcing a confrontation before this pack has time to properly prepare its defenses." Elena felt her stomach drop. How could he possibly know about my bloodline? Only a handful of people are even aware. "Spies," Damien said grimly, echoing Serafina's earlier warning. "Kane has ears in nearly every territory in this region, including our own, it seems. If he knows, then likely every alpha attending this summit will know as well, whether from his own announcement or from rumors that have already begun spreading beyond Blackthorn's borders." "What happens if he exposes me?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Every alpha in the region will understand exactly what you represent," Nathaniel said. "Some will see an opportunity for alliance. Others will see a threat requiring elimination before it can grow stronger. Kane, I suspect, hopes to position himself as the one who neutralizes that threat, either by claiming you for himself, through some forced arrangement, or by ensuring you never leave that summit alive. The weight of the threat settled heavily over the small group standing along the eastern wall, the reality of Elena's newfound power finally crystallizing into something with immediate, dangerous consequences, rather than distant, theoretical concern. When is the summit scheduled? Elena asked. 5 days from now, Nathaniel said, at neutral ground near the Central Territories, where several regional packs traditionally gather to resolve disputes without direct conflict on any single pack's home territory. I need to be there, Elena said, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice. Damien turned to her sharply. Absolutely not. Walking into a gathering of regional alphas, several of whom may already view you as either a prize to be claimed or a threat to be eliminated, is far too dangerous. Staying hidden hasn't kept me safe, Elena said, echoing Clara's own words back at him. It only delayed the inevitable moment when my enemies would learn the truth on their own terms, rather than mine. If Kane intends to expose me at this summit, regardless of whether I attend, I would rather stand there and face that exposure directly, on my own terms, than hide here and wait for the consequences to find me anyway. Damien's jaw tightened, clearly torn between his instinct to protect her and his growing recognition that Elena was no longer the same overlooked Omega who had once accepted his cruelty without protest. If you insist on attending, he said finally, then you will not go alone. I will accompany you, along with a full guard, and we will prepare you as thoroughly as possible in the days before the summit. Agreed, Elena said, relief flickering briefly across her features, despite the daunting nature of what lay ahead. The 5 days leading up to the summit passed in a blur of preparation, unlike anything Elena had experienced before. Clara worked with her each night in the forest clearing, helping her practice calling upon her wolf form deliberately, without the crutch of fear or desperate necessity that had triggered her earlier transformations. Progress came slowly at first, frustratingly so, but by the third night, Elena found herself able to shift on command, the silver-white fur rippling smoothly across her skin, with growing ease each time. You're learning faster than most bearers of this bloodline manage in months, Clara observed during their final session before the summit, genuine pride evident in her voice. Your grandmother would be proud of the progress you've made in such a short time. I still don't feel ready, Elena admitted, watching her own reflection shift in a nearby puddle, silver fur and golden eyes staring back at her with a confidence she still did not entirely feel inside. What if I freeze in front of all those alphas? What if the power doesn't answer when I need it most? It will answer, Clara said with quiet certainty, because you have finally stopped doubting that it belongs to you. Trust that, Elena, more than you trust any fear the coming days might bring. Damien, meanwhile, worked alongside Nathaniel to prepare a full guard for the journey, selecting only the pack's most trusted and capable warriors to accompany them to the neutral summit grounds. He spent considerable time briefing Elena on the political landscape she would soon navigate, the various regional alphas, their known alliances and rivalries, the delicate diplomatic customs that govern such gatherings even amid rising tension. Alpha Marcus Whitfield of the Northern Territories tends toward caution, Damien explained one evening, spreading a rough map across his study desk. He's unlikely to act aggressively, but he's also unlikely to offer support without significant persuasion. Alpha Grace Sinclair of the Coastal Packs has long resented Kane's growing influence in this region. She may prove a valuable ally, if approached carefully. Elena absorbed the information as best she could, though the sheer scope of pack politics she had never once needed to understand during her years in the kitchens felt overwhelming. I don't know if I can navigate all of this, she admitted. I've spent my entire life being invisible. I don't know how to command a room full of powerful alphas. You already have, Damien said quietly. The night of the border attack, and again during the fighting that followed. You commanded respect from wolves twice your size, without raising your voice, or making a single demand. That instinct exists within you, Elena, whether you fully recognize it yet or not. Trust it, the same way you're learning to trust your wolf. Elena found herself studying him during these preparation sessions, noting the genuine care evident in his careful attention to her readiness, the patience he showed in answering her countless questions, without a trace of the impatience or cruelty that had once defined their entire relationship. Whatever calculation Clara had warned her to watch for seemed entirely absent from his behavior now, replaced by something that felt, cautiously, like genuine partnership. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said, during one of their final preparation sessions. "Of course," Damien said. "Why did you change?" She asked. "Toward me, I mean. You spent years treating me with contempt, and now you're spending every free hour helping me prepare for something that terrifies me. What actually changed?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, considering the question, with evident seriousness, rather than offering a quick, easy answer. "I think," he said finally, "that I spent years measuring worth entirely by the standards I was raised to value: strength, dominance, the ability to command through force alone. I never once questioned whether that measurement was accurate, because everyone around me reinforced the same values, generation after generation. Watching you shift that night at the storehouse, watching you save Owen's life and mine without a trace of the aggression I had always associated with true strength, forced me to question everything I believed about power. You didn't need to dominate anyone to be powerful, Elena. You simply needed to be exactly who you already were." Elena felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion at his words, the sincerity in his voice impossible to doubt. "That's the kindest thing anyone in this pack has ever said to me," she admitted quietly. "Then this pack has failed you far more than I realized," Damien said, his voice heavy with genuine regret. "And I intend to spend considerably more effort ensuring that failure doesn't continue, starting with whatever happens at this summit." They departed for the neutral summit grounds 2 days later, a small but heavily armed party, consisting of Elena, Damien, Nathaniel, and a dozen carefully selected guards. The journey took the better part of a full day, winding through unfamiliar territory that grew increasingly tense as they approached the traditional gathering grounds, a wide open valley surrounded by ancient standing stones, said to have marked neutral territory for regional pack disputes, since long before recorded memory. Elena felt the weight of countless unfamiliar eyes settle upon her the moment their party arrived at the valley's edge. Wolves and human-formed representatives from at least 6 different regional territories, already gathered in loose clusters around the ancient stones. Whispers rippled through the assembled crowd almost immediately, curious glances following Elena's every movement as their party made their way toward the designated meeting area. "They already know," Elena murmured to Damien, her earlier confidence wavering slightly under the weight of so much unfamiliar scrutiny. "They suspect," Damien corrected gently. "Rumors have clearly spread ahead of us, but suspicion and confirmation are different things. Stay close, and remember everything we discussed." Victor Kane arrived shortly after, accompanied by a larger retinue than any other attending pack, his confident, predatory smile settling into place the moment his eyes found Elena among Blackthorn's party. He made no immediate move toward confrontation, instead taking his position among the assembled alphas as the formal summit proceedings began, though his gaze returned to Elena repeatedly throughout the early discussions, calculating and patient, like a hunter, content to wait for the perfect moment to strike. That moment arrived roughly an hour into the proceedings, as the assembled alphas debated the escalating tensions between Blackthorn and Ravenswood territories, following the failed alliance and subsequent border attack. "I believe," Kane said, rising from his seat with deliberate ceremony, "that this entire conflict stems from a misunderstanding regarding the true stakes involved. Alpha Ashford has been sheltering something within his territory that concerns not just Blackthorn or Ravenswood, but every pack gathered here today." The assembled alphas turned their attention toward Kane, curiosity evident on several faces. Elena felt her pulse quicken, understanding immediately what was coming. "A Lunar King bloodline," Kane continued, his voice carrying easily across the valley, believed extinct for nearly 2 centuries, has resurfaced within Blackthorn territory. "I have confirmed reports that an Omega within Alpha Ashford's own pack has demonstrated abilities consistent with this ancient and powerful lineage. I ask you all, is it wise to allow such power to remain concentrated within a single territory, controlled by a single Alpha, when the balance of this entire region could be forever altered by its existence?" A ripple of shocked murmurs spread through the gathered crowd, dozens of eyes now fixed directly on Elena, with an intensity that made her want to shrink away, old instincts screaming at her to disappear, to become invisible once more. She fought against that instinct with every fiber of her being, forcing herself to stand tall despite the overwhelming attention. "Is this true?" Alpha Marcus Whitfield asked, his cautious expression now sharp with genuine concern. "A lunar bloodline, restored after all this time?" Damien stepped forward, before Elena could respond, his voice steady and commanding. "The bloodline exists," he confirmed, "though I would remind this council that Alpha Kane's sudden interest in exposing this information conveniently follows his own failed attempt to seize this power for himself, through both a broken alliance and an unprovoked attack on Blackthorn's eastern border." Kane's expression darkened slightly at the accusation, though he did not deny it outright. "A regrettable misunderstanding," he said smoothly, born from concern that Blackthorn intended to hoard this power for its own advantage, rather than share the knowledge with this council, as tradition demands. "Enough," Elena said, her voice cutting through the rising argument with unexpected clarity, surprising even herself with its steadiness. Every eye in the valley turned toward her as she stepped forward, away from the protective formation Damien and his guards had maintained around her since their arrival. "I am the one you're discussing," she said, addressing the assembled council directly. "Perhaps it would be more productive to ask me directly, rather than debating my existence as though I were a resource to be claimed or a threat to be neutralized." Silence fell over the valley, the assembled alphas visibly startled by the boldness of an Omega addressing them so directly, a breach of traditional pack hierarchy that would have been unthinkable only weeks earlier. "Very well," Alpha Grace Sinclair said, breaking the silence with evident curiosity rather than hostility. "Speak then. Tell us what you are, and what you intend to do with the power you carry." Elena took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of every gathered gaze, and began to speak. "I am not a weapon to be claimed," Elena said, her voice growing steadier with each word. "I am not a threat requiring elimination, nor a prize to be won through marriage or conquest. I am a member of Blackthorn Pack, who spent 22 years believing herself weak and unworthy, only to discover that the strength I carried had simply been waiting for the right moment to emerge. I did not ask for this bloodline, and I did not seek this power. But now that it has found me, I intend to use it to protect the people I care about, not to serve the ambitions of anyone in this valley who sees me as nothing more than a means to greater control over this region." Victor Kane's expression had shifted from calculated confidence to something sharper, more dangerous, as Elena spoke. "Pretty words," he said, "from an Omega who has held this power for mere weeks. Power like yours, left untrained and unguided by anyone with true understanding of its origins, is far more dangerous than you seem to realize. Perhaps it would be wiser for such a bloodline to be guided by someone with the experience and wisdom to wield it properly." "Meaning yourself, presumably," Damien said, stepping to Elena's side once more, though he did not attempt to speak for her this time. "Meaning someone capable of demonstrating true strength," Kane said, his gaze fixed on Elena with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "If this bloodline is truly as powerful as the old stories suggest, let her prove it. Here, before this council, rather than hiding behind Blackthorn's protection." The challenge hung heavy in the air, and Elena understood immediately what Kane intended. A public demonstration that would either validate his claims about her power's danger, giving him justification to demand her removal from Blackthorn's control, or expose her as insufficiently trained, weak enough to dismiss and disregard entirely. "I don't need to prove anything to you," Elena said, though uncertainty flickered briefly beneath her steady exterior. "Then perhaps you need to prove it to yourself," Kane said, his voice dropping into something almost gentle, almost persuasive, a tone Elena recognized instinctively as manipulation rather than genuine concern. "How long will you allow Alpha Ashford to speak for you, to protect you, to determine what you are and are not capable of? A true lunar queen would not need anyone's permission to demonstrate her own strength." Elena felt the barb land exactly where Kane had intended, old insecurities stirring, despite everything she had learned about herself in recent weeks. But beneath that familiar sting of doubt, she felt something else now, something steadier and more certain than she had ever possessed before. "You're right about one thing," she said, meeting Kane's gaze directly. "I don't need anyone's permission. Not yours, and not Damien's either." She turned toward Damien briefly, offering a small, reassuring nod, before stepping fully away from Blackthorn's protective formation, moving to stand alone, at the center of the ancient stone circle. "Elena," Damien said quietly, concern evident in his voice, though he made no move to stop her. "I know what I'm doing," Elena said, and found, to her own surprise, that she genuinely believed it. She closed her eyes, letting the noise of the assembled crowd fade into background silence, focusing instead on the warm, steady pull she had learned to recognize over the past several weeks. She did not summon the power out of fear this time, nor out of desperate necessity. She summoned it because she chose to, because she had finally, fully accepted that the strength belonged to her, completely and unconditionally, without needing anyone's validation to make it real. The transformation, when it came, unfolded with a grace and control unlike anything she had achieved before, silver-white fur rippling smoothly across her skin as her body shifted into its true wolf form, golden eyes burning bright even in the fading afternoon light. But this time, something more happened, something that even Clara's teachings had not fully prepared her for. A wave of pure, ancient authority radiated outward from her transformed body, an almost physical pressure that rippled across the entire valley. Every wolf present, human or shifted, felt the weight of that presence settle over them like an invisible hand pressing down on their very instincts. Several of the lesser-ranked wolves in the crowd dropped to their knees immediately, an involuntary response their bodies executed, before their conscious minds fully understood what was happening. Even the assembled alphas were not immune. Alpha Whitfield staggered back a step, visibly startled by the intensity of the pressure. Alpha Sinclair's eyes widened with something close to awe rather than fear. And Victor Kane himself, for all his careful composure, found his knees buckling slightly beneath him, a look of genuine shock crossing his features, as his body responded to an ancient instinct he had never before experienced, one that recognized true dominance, regardless of any political ambition or personal pride. Elena felt the power moving through her, vast and steady, nothing like the desperate, uncontrolled bursts she had experienced during her earlier transformations. This was deliberate. This was complete. This was, for the first time in her entire life, the fullness of who she truly was, unhidden and unashamed. Damien stood at the edge of the stone circle, watching the scene unfold with an expression of pure astonishment. He felt the pressure of Elena's presence settle over him as well. The same ancient instinct that had driven others to their knees pulling at something deep within his own wolf. An acknowledgement of authority that transcended pack rank or personal pride. He did not fight it. Slowly, deliberately, in full view of every gathered alpha and pack member in that valley, Damien Ashford, Alpha King of Blackthorn territory, lowered himself to one knee before Elena Hartley, the Omega he had once sneered at and called too weak for a king. The gesture rippled through the crowd like a physical shockwave, gasps and murmurs spreading rapidly among the assembled wolves as they witnessed an Alpha King voluntarily submit to power they had, until moments earlier, believed rested entirely with Kane's dismissive claims about an untested, dangerous Omega. Elena, still in her wolf form, felt a wave of emotion so overwhelming it nearly broke her concentration entirely. She had spent her entire life being told she was weak, unworthy, beneath the notice of the very man now kneeling before her. And now, in this ancient circle of stones, surrounded by the most powerful wolves in the region, that same man knelt in genuine, undeniable acknowledgement of exactly how wrong those years of cruelty had been. She allowed the transformation to ease, shifting back to her human form with the same smooth control that had marked her transformation moments earlier. The valley remained utterly silent, every eye fixed on the scene before them, waiting to see what would happen next. "Rise," Elena said quietly, extending a hand toward Damien. He looked up at her, and in his dark eyes, Elena saw none of the arrogance or cruelty that had once defined their relationship. She saw only genuine, humbled respect, and something warmer beneath it that she was not yet ready to name. Damien rose slowly, taking her offered hand, though he did not release it immediately once he stood. "I believe," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent valley, "that this council owes Elena Hartley an apology, myself included, for ever doubting the strength that has clearly always lived within her." Victor Kane, still visibly shaken by the involuntary response his own body had shown, straightened with obvious effort, attempting to salvage some measure of his earlier composure. An impressive display, he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. But a single demonstration does not erase the danger such power represents, unclaimed and untethered to proper guidance. The only danger in this valley today, Alpha Sinclair said sharply, cutting Kane off before he could continue, was the one you orchestrated through your own attempted invasion of Blackthorn territory. I, for one, have seen more than enough to understand exactly where true strength and true danger reside in this conflict, Alpha Kane, and it is not with the young woman who just demonstrated more restraint and integrity than you have shown throughout this entire proceeding. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled council, the tide of opinion shifting visibly away from Kane's earlier accusations and toward something closer to respect, even reverence, for the power Elena had just displayed. Kane's expression darkened further, though he said nothing more, clearly recognizing that the political ground beneath him had shifted dramatically in the span of a few short minutes. The summit concluded shortly after, with the assembled council formally condemning Kane's attack on Blackthorn's border and calling for a period of reparations to be negotiated between the two territories. Elena, for the first time in her entire life, walked away from a gathering of powerful wolves, not as someone overlooked or dismissed, but as someone whose presence had fundamentally altered the balance of an entire regional council. The journey back to Blackthorn territory carried a very different atmosphere than their journey to the summit had held only days earlier. Where before Elena had felt the weight of uncertainty and fear pressing down on her with every step, now she felt something closer to quiet, unfamiliar pride, tempered by the knowledge that the danger surrounding her had not fully passed, merely shifted into a new and uncertain shape. Damien rode beside her for much of the journey, uncharacteristically quiet, his expression thoughtful in a way that suggested he was still processing everything that had unfolded at the summit. Elena found herself studying him occasionally, uncertain how to navigate the strange new territory of their relationship, now that the balance of power between them had shifted so dramatically. "You knelt," she said finally, breaking the silence between them, as they made camp for the night along the forest path. "In front of everyone." "I did," Damien confirmed, adding another log to the small fire between them. "Why?" Elena asked. "You didn't have to. I never asked that of you." Damien was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames before answering. "Because it was true," he said finally. "Whatever instinct lives within every wolf, whatever recognizes true authority and true strength, responded to your presence in that valley, in a way I have never experienced before, not even in the presence of alphas far more senior and established than myself. I did not kneel, because I felt forced to, Elena. I knelt because some deep, ancient part of me recognized exactly what you are, and refusing to acknowledge that truth would have been its own form of dishonesty." Elena considered his words carefully, the weight of them settling somewhere deep in her chest. "I spent so many years wanting exactly this," she admitted quietly. "Respect. Recognition. To matter to this pack. To matter to you. In a way that went beyond simply being overlooked or dismissed. And now that I have it, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to trust that it's real, rather than something that will disappear the moment my usefulness fades." "It's real," Damien said firmly. "And Elena, I need you to understand something. My respect for you, whatever else it has become, did not begin the moment you shifted into that silver wolf and brought an entire valley of alphas to their knees. It began weeks earlier, watching you warn this pack of an attack that would have cost countless lives had you remained silent out of fear or self-preservation. It began watching you fight alongside wolves twice your size, without hesitation, protecting people who had shown you little kindness throughout your entire life within this pack. The power you carry is remarkable, yes, but it was never the power alone that changed how I see you." Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, unexpected and difficult to hold back. "That might be the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me," she said softly. "Then I intend to say considerably kinder things, as often as you'll allow me to," Damien said, a rare, genuine warmth in his expression that Elena had never seen directed toward her before, not even in their most recent, careful interactions. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, the fire crackling softly between them, before Elena finally voiced the question that had been weighing on her since the summit's conclusion. "What happens now? With Kane, I mean." He humiliated himself in front of the entire regional council. But I don't believe for a moment that means he's simply going to accept defeat and move on. Damien's expression sobered considerably. No, he agreed. Men like Victor Kane do not accept defeat gracefully. If anything, tonight's events have likely only deepened his determination to either claim your power for himself or ensure it never poses a threat to his ambitions again. We should expect further attempts, Elena, though I suspect they will be more calculated and less openly aggressive than the border attack, given how thoroughly his reputation has suffered before the regional council. Then I need to keep growing stronger, Elena said, determination hardening her voice. I can't afford to remain the same uncertain, untrained wolf who barely managed to summon her power out of desperate fear only weeks ago. You won't have to face that growth alone, Damien said. Clara will continue training you, and I intend to ensure every resource this pack possesses is made available to support that training, for as long as it takes. The weeks that followed brought a steady, deliberate transformation to Elena's life within Blackthorn territory, both in terms of her growing mastery over her ancient power and in terms of her position within the pack itself. The whispers that had once followed her with suspicion or dismissive contempt now carried genuine respect, though Elena remained cautious about accepting that respect too readily, mindful of Clara's earlier warnings about trust built too quickly in the wake of dramatic events. Her training with Clara intensified considerably, moving beyond simple control of her transformation into deeper exploration of the abilities tied to her Lunar King heritage. She learned to sense the emotional state of wolves around her with startling clarity, a skill Clara explained had once allowed ancient lunar rulers to identify true loyalty among their followers. She learned to extend the pressure of her presence deliberately, calling upon it in measured doses, rather than the overwhelming wave that had swept across the Summit Valley, a skill that required considerable discipline and restraint to master safely. You're progressing remarkably well, Clara told her during one of their evening sessions, genuine pride evident in her voice. Faster than I dared hope, given how recently your power first awakened. I still have so much to learn, Elena said, though the familiar edge of self-doubt that had once colored every such statement had largely faded, replaced by simple acknowledgement of the considerable journey still ahead of her. You do, Clara agreed, but you no longer doubt that you're capable of learning it, which is, in many ways, the most important lesson of all. Elena's relationship with the rest of Blackthorn Pack continued evolving as well, though not without occasional friction. Some of the pack elders who had once viewed her power with suspicion gradually warmed toward genuine respect, particularly as Elena continued demonstrating restraint and consideration in how she wielded her growing abilities, never once using her newfound status to belittle or dismiss others, the way she herself had once been treated. Others remained more cautious, uncertain how to navigate a pack hierarchy suddenly upended by the emergence of power that superseded even the Alpha King's own authority. Elena found herself, somewhat to her own surprise, taking on an informal role as mediator during several minor pack disputes, her unique perspective, as someone who had experienced life at every level of the pack's social structure, proving valuable in ways she had never anticipated. Her relationship with Damien continued deepening as well, evolving from the careful, uncertain civility that had marked their earliest interactions into something warmer, more genuine, though both remained cautious about defining exactly what that warmth meant. They spent increasing amounts of time together, discussions of pack business gradually giving way to quieter, more personal conversations as the weeks progressed. I never properly thanked you, Damien said one evening, as they walked together along the same forest path where Elena had first encountered Clara so many weeks earlier. For everything you've done for this pack, for the warning that saved countless lives during the border attack, for standing before the regional council and refusing to let Kane's manipulation define how this entire region perceives you. You've thanked me plenty, Elena said, a small smile touching her lips. Though I appreciate you saying it again. I mean it more fully this time, Damien said, stopping and turning to face her directly. Elena, I spent years treating you with a cruelty I cannot fully excuse, regardless of how much I've come to regret it since. You had every reason to reject any attempt at friendship or partnership I might have offered after everything that happened. Instead, you chose to trust me, gradually and cautiously, but genuinely nonetheless. That trust means more to me than I know how to properly express. Elena felt her heart quicken at the sincerity in his voice, the vulnerability evident in his expression that she had never once witnessed during their earlier, more contentious interactions. "I'm still learning to trust you fully," she admitted honestly. "But I don't regret the trust I've extended so far. You've earned it, Damien, through actions rather than simply words, which matters considerably more to me." "Then perhaps," Damien said carefully, "you might allow me to continue earning it. Not simply as your alpha, or as an ally in whatever conflict lies ahead with Kane, but as someone who has come to care for you far more deeply than I ever expected, given how our history together began." Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing the weight of his words against the memory of every cruelty he had once shown her, against the genuine growth she had witnessed in him since that fateful night at the storehouse. "I think," she said finally, "that I would like that very much." The smile that broke across Damien's face in response was unlike anything Elena had seen from him before, genuine and unguarded, in a way that made her own heart lift in response. Whatever remained of the old wounds between them, this moment felt like the true beginning of something neither of them had expected to find, born from the unlikeliest of circumstances. Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed within the pack, nor did it go unnoticed by those watching from beyond Blackthorn's borders. Word reached Nathaniel within days that Victor Kane had begun making inquiries throughout the region, seeking information about Elena's training, her movements, and the extent of her growing bond with Damien. "He's planning something," Nathaniel warned during a private council meeting held shortly after the reports reached him. "Whether an assassination attempt or another attempt at capture, I cannot say with certainty, but his interest in Elena has clearly not diminished, despite his humiliation at the summit." "Let him plan," Elena said, surprising the assembled council with the steadiness of her voice. "I am no longer the frightened Omega, who barely understood her own power weeks ago. If Kane wishes to test that strength further, I am prepared to answer that challenge directly, rather than waiting anxiously for his next move." Damien studied her with evident pride, though concern remained visible beneath it. "We will not be complacent regardless," he said. "Increased patrols along every border, and additional guards assigned to your protection whenever you leave the keep." Elena did not argue the point, recognizing the wisdom in caution, even as her own confidence continued growing with each passing day. The threat from Kane remained real and present, a shadow hanging over the growing warmth between herself and Damien, over the steady progress of her training, over the tentative peace the pack had begun to enjoy since the summit's conclusion. That shadow, Elena understood with quiet certainty, would not remain distant for much longer. The final confrontation arrived on a night heavy with autumn mist, nearly a month after the summit that had transformed Elena's place within Blackthorn Pack forever. Word reached the keep just before midnight that a large force had been spotted crossing the northern border, far from the eastern boundary that had marked Kane's previous attack, a deliberate choice meant to catch Blackthorn's defenses unprepared. "He's learned from his last attempt," Nathaniel said grimly, as the pack mobilized with practiced urgency. "This time he's coming with everything he has." Elena felt the familiar pull of her power stirring within her chest as she prepared for battle, though the sensation carried none of the uncertainty or fear that had once accompanied it. She had spent a full month training with Clara, deepening her mastery over abilities that had once felt entirely foreign and uncontrollable. Whatever Kane intended with this final assault, Elena felt ready to meet it, not with desperate survival instinct alone, but with the full, deliberate strength of who she had become. "Stay close to me," Damien said, as they moved toward the northern border alongside the assembled pack defenders, his hand briefly finding hers before the demands of battle preparation pulled them apart. "Whatever happens tonight, we face it together." "Together," Elena agreed, the word carrying a weight and meaning it would never have held in the frightened, uncertain days before her wolf had first awakened. The battle that followed dwarfed the earlier border skirmish, in both scale and intensity. Kane had brought nearly his entire fighting force, dozens of wolves surging across the northern boundary with a ferocity that spoke of desperate, calculated ambition rather than simple territorial aggression. Elena understood, watching the chaos unfold around her, that this was Kane's final gambit, an all-or-nothing attempt to claim either her power or Blackthorn territory itself, before his damaged reputation cost him any further standing within the region. She fought with a control and precision that would have been impossible only weeks earlier, her silver-white wolf form moving through the chaos, with deliberate purpose, rather than desperate instinct. She called upon the pressure of her ancient authority in careful, measured bursts, disorienting groups of attacking wolves without overextending herself, allowing Blackthorn's defenders to capitalize on the openings her power created. The tide of battle began shifting steadily in Blackthorn's favor as the night wore on. Kane's forces gradually pushed back toward the border, despite their initial numerical advantage. Elena caught sight of Damien fighting several yards away, holding his own against multiple attackers with the fierce, practiced skill of an experienced Alpha King, and felt a surge of fierce protectiveness that carried her swiftly to his side, driving back an attacker who had nearly caught him from behind. It was in the final, chaotic moments of the battle that Elena finally encountered Victor Kane himself, the Ravenswood Alpha having shifted into his own formidable wolf form, dark fur matted with blood from the fighting, his golden eyes burning with a mixture of rage and desperation as he recognized Elena approaching through the chaos. They faced each other across a small clearing at the heart of the battlefield, the fighting around them momentarily forgotten, as both understood, with instinctive clarity, that this confrontation would determine the outcome of everything that had unfolded across the preceding month. Kane lunged first, his massive form moving with surprising speed despite his obvious exhaustion from the extended battle. Elena met his charge with steady confidence, her own power responding smoothly to her call, silver light gathering around her as she sidestepped his attack and countered with controlled, deliberate force, rather than desperate, uncoordinated defense. The confrontation that followed unfolded swiftly, Elena's growing mastery over her abilities proving more than a match for Kane's raw strength and experience. She did not seek to harm him beyond what was necessary to end the confrontation, her restraint a deliberate choice rather than any lack of capability, understanding that unnecessary cruelty would only replicate the very flaws she had witnessed and rejected in Damien's earlier behavior. Kane finally staggered back, exhausted and thoroughly overwhelmed, shifting back to his human form as he collapsed to his knees before her, the same involuntary response that had swept across the Summit Valley weeks earlier, now claiming him fully in the wake of direct confrontation. "This ends now," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing, the fighting around them gradually stilling, as Kane's remaining forces recognized their leader's defeat. "You've lost, Kane. Not just this battle, but everything you hoped to gain through it. Withdraw your remaining forces, and this conflict ends here, tonight, without further loss on either side." Kane looked up at her, defeat, and something almost like grudging respect visible in his exhausted expression. "You've grown considerably," he said, his voice hoarse. "More than I anticipated, in far less time than should have been possible." "I had good teachers," Elena said simply, "and a reason worth fighting for that you never possessed, Kane. You sought power for its own sake. I sought only to protect the people I care about. That difference, in the end, was always going to determine the outcome of this conflict." Kane said nothing further, and moments later, his remaining forces began their retreat, carrying their defeated Alpha with them, back across the northern border, the sounds of battle finally fading into the quiet aftermath of victory. The morning after the battle brought a strange, quiet peace to Blackthorn territory, the pack gathering to tend their wounded and begin the slow process of rebuilding after weeks of escalating conflict. Elena found herself standing atop the keep's outer wall as dawn broke over the eastern horizon, watching the pack she had once served invisibly, now moving with renewed purpose and unity below her. Damien joined her there, his own exhaustion from the battle evident in his tired but genuinely content expression. "Reports suggest Kane has retreated fully back to Ravenswood territory," he said. "Nathaniel believes his council will move to replace him as Alpha within the coming months, given how thoroughly his ambitions have damaged both his reputation and his territory's standing within the region." "I take no pleasure in his downfall," Elena said quietly. "Even after everything he attempted against this pack, against me specifically." "That restraint and compassion," Damien said, "is exactly why this pack, and increasingly this entire region, has come to see you as something far more remarkable than simple power alone could ever create." He turned to face her fully, his expression growing more serious. "Elena, I've spent the past month coming to understand something I should have recognized far sooner than I did. You are not simply a powerful ally, or a bloodline this pack is fortunate to have discovered. You are someone I have come to care for more deeply than I ever expected to care for anyone, And I find myself hoping, however presumptuous it may be, that you might feel something similar." Elena felt her heart swell with an emotion she had spent her entire life believing she would never experience, not from this pack, and certainly not from the very man who had once sneered at her weakness in front of the entire hall. "I do feel something similar," she admitted softly, "though I never expected to find it with you, given how our story began." "Then perhaps," Damien said, reaching for her hand with careful, hopeful uncertainty, "we might consider writing a different ending than the one our beginning suggested." Elena laced her fingers through his, the gesture feeling entirely natural despite everything that had once stood between them. "I'd like that," she said, a genuine smile spreading across her face as the morning sun rose fully over the horizon, casting warm golden light across the territory she had once served as an invisible, overlooked Omega, and now stood ready to protect and lead, as something far greater than either of them had ever imagined possible. In the weeks that followed, Elena's role within Blackthorn Pack continued evolving, her position eventually formalized not as Damien's subordinate, nor simply as his companion, but as an equal partner in leading the territory forward, her ancient bloodline finally recognized and honored, rather than hidden away in fear. The regional council, having witnessed her strength and character firsthand, welcomed her as a respected voice among their ranks, the balance of power across the entire region shifting steadily toward greater stability under her quiet, principled influence. Clara remained a constant presence in Elena's life, continuing to guide her through the deeper mysteries of the Lunar King heritage, even as Elena grew increasingly confident in her own abilities and judgment. The bond between grandmother's dearest friend and granddaughter deepened into something resembling true family, a connection Elena had never expected to find after believing herself entirely alone in the world for so many years. And Damien, the Alpha King who had once declared her too weak for a king, found himself instead standing beside a true queen, one whose strength had never needed his validation to be real, but who had chosen, freely and completely, to build a future alongside him regardless. Together, they led Blackthorn Pack into an era of unprecedented strength and unity, the ancient power of the Lunar Kings finally restored, not through conquest or fear, but through the quiet, unshakable integrity of a woman who had once been told she would never be strong enough to matter, and who had proven, beyond any doubt, exactly how wrong that cruel judgment had always been.